We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences, so the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire right now and support our show by saying that you heard about Indeed on this podcast. That's Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
From your favorite source for Chicago White Sox talk, delivering news, interviews, analysis, and more. This is the Sox Machine podcast with your hosts, Jim Margalus, James Fegan, and Josh Nelson.
Thanks, Rob, and welcome to the Sox Machine podcast. I'm your host, Josh Nelson, and it's Wednesday night, July 17th, 2024, as we record this new episode. This weekend is our annual road trip that we at Sox Machine co-host with our friends from the 108 as we embark to Kansas City. Look forward to meeting many of you, and to help aid our trip, Jim Margalus sat down with former White Sox pitcher Scott Carroll, who is from Kansas City and currently resides there. Scott gives some helpful tips for Kansas City and shares his experience, what it was like being on the last Birmingham Barons playoff team. We were expecting this episode to be more of a filler show as the MLB Draft wrapped up and buy us some time getting to the airports and making our trek to KC. However, White Sox general manager Chris Getz had other ideas. The Chicago White Sox curiously signed former number 2 overall pick Nick Senzel to a major league contract, which resulted in the DFA of Danny Mendick and optioning Lenyn Sosa. While some Sox fans were confused about Sosa being optioned, in the famous words from Billy Mays, "Wait, there's more," Getz DFA'd Martin Maldonado. A surprising move on the surface because of how much Maldonado was praised for his work with the pitchers and game calling from manager Pedro Grifol. Now Grifol loses one of his guys, and at least this upcoming weekend on the field in Kansas City, things become a bit hazy as we expect more moves to come. So let's chat about the news, speculate what's to come, and the Chicago White Sox draft team, they are not fond of the NCAA's name, image, likeness infrastructure. Joining me now are Sox Machine's beat reporter James Fegan and managing editor Jim Margalus. So, James, next time you see Chris Getz, send him our thank yous for giving us some newsworthy topics to talk about before we make our way to Kansas City. As when we record this, the Wednesday after the All-Star game is notorious as being the slowest news day in sports because not much is going on in the wide world of sports. But here are the White Sox making some news after the American League again beat the National League in the All-Star game Tuesday night. The White Sox DFA'd Martin Maldonado. On the surface, this is a surprising move, James, but when you dive deep into the numbers, Maldonado this year, he only played 48 games. He batted 119. He had a .230 slugging percentage. But in his last 15 games, he started to wake up. Most recently, in the last week, where Maldonado went 6 for 18 and he hit 3 home runs. So with Martin Maldonado on fire at the plate, why are the White Sox making this move now, James, after the All-Star game?
Yeah, we had a clip show planned. We were going to do a lot of like, hey, remember that time? And then throw the old audio. On one hand, like, it's the worst hitter in baseball, so to speak. Not so to speak. So there's never like a bad time for it. And, they already added Chucky Robinson to the 40-man because they wanted to give him a look at some point. And there's, scouts that'll tell you that he's interesting as a backup. Maybe if he really performs well, like you can have a veteran group with him and Korey Lee. But then if Carroll is not, MLB debut ready by opening day next year. So All-Star break is at least somewhat of a divider in time to dedicate a certain portion of the season to like exploring if you have anything here. But yeah, it's weird for somebody that kind of took so many arrows for willingly all year. I don't blame them for not assuming that Martin Maldonado is good to hit like this for the rest of the season. That I don't feel like that'd be good internal analysis or scouting, but it's weird to when he's suddenly making a more palatable performance to have that be cutting the cord. Which suggests kind of, there's kind of the day-to-day grind that the coaching staff has to defend publicly what they have and why they're doing what they have. And then the front office kind of operate with their larger goals that are really bigger than the season or day-to-day responses. So it can seem kind of weird where you're hearing like Pedro Grifol regularly feeling like it's his job to go out there and just defend Maldonado against all evidence of the statistical variation. And then having the front office having like, all right, we're done. And not really seeing a progression towards that in public comments. So I think that's a weird element to it, but you also can't look to it like, why did they do this? Like I think he's performed under even what your expectations would be for his offense based on his own career history.
And that's a good point, James. Like cutting Maldonado, Jim. Yeah, on paper, it makes total sense. They should have made this move a while ago. But I like the point that James makes because as James will be in Kansas City this weekend and the White Sox beat reporters meet with Pedro Grifol for the first time post All-Star game, Pedro's got to defend this move from his bosses that made this decision, whether or not Grifol's on board with it, Jim. And Maldonado's Grifol's guy. And now he's not on the team. And this is after the White Sox signed a 1-year, $4 million contract for Maldonado, so more money the White Sox are burning. I just find this to be interesting timing, and I can't wait for Grifol to speak on Friday to James and the rest of the White Sox beat reporters and hear him try to defend Chris Getz making this move of cutting ties with Maldonado.
What I'm waiting for when it comes to Maldonado is just if there's a trade, if the DFA process results in another team picking him up, because there are some contenders with catching issues and trying to find anybody who can fill in on a 40-man roster for a few weeks. I mean, even Sebi Zavala got claimed last year and he was having a pretty rough season. So there are always teams that can use a catcher who knows what he's doing when it comes to game planning, being behind the plate for like 2 games a week. So perhaps like if this is a situation where Maldonado is going to be traded, Grifol's line could be pretty easy. This is a case of we're starting to pivot towards next season. Maldonado will not be in our plan, so it's in our it's our obligation to him as a professional to find the best possible opportunity for the rest of the year, and that can basically be the way he sells it, whether or not he believes it, whether internally he's thinking like, oh my God, I've lost my security blanket behind the plate. Korey Lee can't do anything. Help me, God, help me. Like he won't say that. He'll keep a pretty pretty good poker face about it because he's really not all that expressive in general. So that's kind of what I'm anticipating, just because I've seen, when I saw Maldonado being DFA'd, I saw a bunch of tweets underneath Ken Rosenthal, like Astros backup catcher, Rangers backup catcher, like a bunch of teams that can just use help right now. I think for the next couple of weeks to where like Maldonado might find an opportunity that's actually an upgrade. So nobody will really be crying about it, whether it's Maldonado himself, whether it's people who are fans of his work ethic and what he brings to a team. Like I think they might be happy for him by the time this month comes to a close.
Okay, so that's a good point. So this move, DFA Maldonado, is starting a timer to be traded, Jim?
10 days, right?
Yeah. And also to Jim's point, Pedro did say openly, like I want to say the day before the last season, they have the first half or that pregame that day, like, yeah, there is a youth movement coming the second half. And we do want to probably, like young players we want to call up, we want to give them more than just September to really see what we have.
Well, Chucky Robinson's not young, right?
Right. Younger than Maldonado. Not that much, only like what, 3 years older than Korey Lee. So wait, if I'm remembering correctly, he's 29. If he's 31, then disregard.
How old is Chucky?
29. Danville's own Chucky Robinson is 29.
James, back to Korey Lee. This is a big test now for Lee. He's been the primary catcher. When you look at playing time, at the beginning of the season, it was Maldonado getting more playing time than Lee. Then it was split 50-50. Lee's been getting more playing time than Maldonado as of late. It has not produced pleasing results, especially offensively. In his last 30 games spanning 96 at-bats, Korey Lee's batting 167 with just a 200 on-base percentage and slugging 302. Edgar Caro's knocking on the door, and we'll see just how much more runway Caro needs to be a serious contender or serious challenger to Lee's starting job as a catcher in the major leagues. But I feel like in the next month, Korey Lee needs to kind of reverse this trend here, James, to build some confidence, not just from people like us or fans of the White Sox, but internally, because the White Sox are hoping that some of these young guys can sell the idea that, yeah, you got staying power in the major leagues, and Korey Lee's one of those guys that needs to prove himself.
Yeah, he's been swinging through a lot of fastballs of recent in a way that's discouraging. And he even noted, like, when we talked to him at the end of before the break, that, like, I'm kind of getting exposed to the league right now, and that's kind of the part of the process. He wasn't down about it, but he's like, the high of success he's getting, the counter adjustment from the league was going to come. And now it's up to him to kind of steer out of it to a bit. But it would seem like Grifol tends to kind of, as he did with Maldonado, talk up confidence and talk about, like, yeah, Korey Lee can be a guy who starts 130 times behind the plate. I think that's kind of like would be a pie in the sky projection, where maybe it's more at the crest of this, you're thinking this could be a guy who really keeps us from having to, like, play Caro like much beyond 100 starts per year. This could be someone who really helps us offload away from the early 2000s level workload, AJ Przinsky type of workload seasons, especially since they thought Caro kind of wore down at the end of last season, and this year his kind of losing weight effort was about being able to play a full minor league season without seeing a tail off. I would think that they would want to kind of build him up gradually and safely and responsibly, and Korey Lee could be a part of that. And now, as this kind of stretches on, or however this like evens out, you're kind of figuring out how big a part of that he can really be. Is he someone whose bat runs into enough mistakes that you're fine with giving him 60 starts or giving him 200 plate appearances, or is it a bit more of anytime Caro's playing, he's catching because we don't really want to suffer through the Lee bats if we don't have to?
Yeah, as long as Pedro Grifol is manager, that's the key phrase there, Jim. We know that Grifol doesn't care about catcher's offense. He's more focused on the pitch calling and the defense behind home plate. Has Korey Lee done enough to convince you, Jim, that he can be the White Sox starting catcher? Not just like at this moment because he's going to be given that runway, but even going into next season, that you're comfortable giving him a longer leash to prove himself?
I think the bat is sometimes a little bit too hard to overlook, just because when he's off his game, like he was last year, like he is right now, he's either swinging through fastballs or like he's hunting the first possible, like anything in the strike zone he can hit to avoid getting to 2 strikes. And so at bats end early. And so he'll contribute to a 4 or 5 pitch inning because it's kind of not necessarily the most team oriented approach right now, the way he's trying to survive in the box. So there are ruts where he gets into where he is Maldonado grade bad, I think, offensively. And, he's been more of that than the hot Korey Lee that we saw for 2 months at the start of the season, I think, when you look at the bulk of his career. So it's probably a case where he needs to be, if not an offense first catcher, probably like equal offense catcher or like half and half, because the arm is good. The pop time's great. It's really impressive. Sometimes I think that, sometimes the pitch selection is kind of curious in terms of sequencing or like doubling or tripling up on a pitch, or like calling for a worse version of a pitch he just threw. So like he gets a swinging strike for like, strike 2, and then he goes back to and just has to be like a slider over the plate or a changeup that is grabbing too much, or a changeup they're ready for. So I think some sequencing is an issue to where, he's not necessarily a savant behind the plate as a game caller, but There's also a case too when it comes to catchers where it seems like reputation does a lot of lifting. And I'm curious now that Maldonado is out, if the rhetoric around Lee will change, because it would be weird if either Grifol goes all in on Chucky Robinson, is like, oh, this guy really knows how to handle pitchers, and he's going to be our guy who, is our game planning guy, or because Maldonado is out and they're not using that topic to keep Maldonado's esteem up or, maintain his spot on the roster. Perhaps that opens up some oxygen for Lee to be like given some credit when he calls a good game, or, if three pitchers combined for one run against a good offense. Like, that was the weird thing about watching the Maldonado Lee debate, was when Maldonado caught a good game, or the pitching staff allowed, 2 or fewer runs, they'd really credit Maldonado. When Lee catches a shutout, it's just like, it's not much about the game calling. It's all about the pitching and defense. So I'm really curious to see whether that changes, because it'd be weird to have 2 catchers who, don't know what they're doing or don't get credit for being good with pitchers. Maybe that will be the case, or maybe they just won't do enough offensively to where and Grifol doesn't have enough invested in them to where you hear that much about them in general. But one thing I'm keeping an ear open for as we go along.
So the White Sox DFA Martin Maldonado. And to Jim's point, this starts the timer. Maybe there's a trade upcoming in the next 10 days. We are expecting more moves by the Chicago White Sox because, as our James Fegan reported, I believe it was on Tuesday before the All-Star game or during the All-Star game, the Chicago White Sox are signing Nick Senzel. That name may sound familiar to you, as he was the former number 2 overall pick of the Cincinnati Reds, last with the Washington Nationals. This is not a minor league contract. This is a major league contract. So Nick Senzel sounds like he's going to be joining the team in Kansas City. Maybe we should invite him to the pregame party, Jim. That'd be kind of weird. But the White Sox DFA Danny Mendick, so he gone, and option Lenyn Sosa. So, James, this is also another curious move by the Chicago White Sox. They're going to give Senzel an opportunity here. What is this, his 3rd, 4th try to prove that he is a major leaguer? But at the same time, cut away from Danny Mendick and Lenyn Sosa from trying to prove that they are major leaguers. And it just seems a bit odd at this stage to bring in a new face to take over for Mendick and Sosa. So any additional insight that you have gathered from your reporting and why the White Sox are making this move?
Mendick hadn't really played very well since tweaking his back. The whole chain of events led to the whole Brian Ramos issue. They were using him a lot to pinch hit for Nicky Lopez against lefties, and not to great effect. And whereas Nick Senzel actually does have above average numbers against lefties, and that's something he brings to roster balance, especially since he's played the outfield, and you have Gavin Sheets probably playing a big role if Tommy Pham gets moved, and there's Andrew Benintendi's been softly getting platooned there every bit more, so having another kind of viable right-handed bat doesn't hurt. They were really using Sosa at second base in the week and a half before the break, and Grifol admitted part of it was like, is that a place to put him when Moncada comes back? And certainly if, with the young moves, you're anticipating Lopez probably playing a lot of shorts. He's probably the best defensive shortstop you have on the roster at that point. So wanting to see if Sosa could handle second was something that they went through, and he did not do well in his audition. The kind of bat, that production that gave optimism, that made you want to see where he could fit in the lineup, really kind of dissipated. And on top of that, his defense was not really tenable. It put him in a spot, moving him from third. It was a bit more reactionary. It's kind of the whole Yohan Moncada corollary, where just letting his athleticism and not giving him a ton of responsibilities as far as where he's supposed to be, double play depth or covering bases and stuff like that. There's just not as much he has to do at third base. It's more just have quick twitch and react and make great athletic plays. Putting Sosa in second base, having a lot of responsibilities, you saw him a step late on a lot of things, a lot of covers where he needed to move around or handle specific things, and he does not have the recovery speed of a more athletic player to cover up those mistakes anyway. He kind of has to be letter perfect, and he's not letter perfect in his decision making, and he doesn't have kind of the quickness to really hide that from you in any way. So yeah, Senzel is not, he's 29. He's never been put up an above average season. The 2016 draft was a long time ago. I don't really think I would try to sell you on like the prospect premium, like as much as like a lot of people and scouts I trust, like back then really loved him. There's been a ton of injuries since then. I think there's probably good reason to expect why no one would really make the argument you're going to see that ceiling tapped in again, but he's been historically a bit more serviceable than these guys who have been sub replacement. And he would match up well in a certain situation. And it's not an inspiring move, but it does seem like a marginal improvement that certainly not expensive or has no value. And I think it would be good if the team did not set the all-time record for losses. So marginal wins, not worthless for them. Certainly can't improve their draft position to lose as much. Can only put people in awkward positions about having to ask players about being part of history.
In 47 games this year, Danny Mendick for the White Sox hit 197 with a 243 on base percentage, slugged 318, so that's a 561 OPS. He did set a new career high in stolen bases in a season with 6 and tied his career high with 3 home runs this year. Also set a new single season career high, 7 doubles this season for Danny Mendick. And when you combine his time with the New York Mets last year, shockingly, in 6 major league seasons, Danny Mendick played 233 games. So there's also that part of like Danny Mendick's story if he never does come back to the White Sox, being a 22nd round pick back in 2015 to play that many seasons and that many games in the majors. Pretty surprising. And again, we'll talk about the draft here, but there's not even a 22nd round anymore in Major League Baseball. So Danny Mendick's probably one of those guys that moving forward doesn't get drafted and gets a $10,000 signing bonus and see if they can pave their way to the majors. So if Danny Mendick never plays for the White Sox again, it was impressive that he got as much playing time as he did, and who knows what would have happened if he didn't get hurt by Adam Hazley in 2022. But Jim, I've got questions about Lenyn Sosa that I want to ask you, because it's not, the picture's not clear for Sosa as what his future is with the White Sox, even though he's 24 years old. There are some within the White Sox community that are supporters of Lenyn Sosa, and they are confused on why the White Sox are signing Nick Senzel and bringing him into the fold. But for Sosa, Jim, like, Charlotte's loaded. You can't play Sosa over Brian Ramos and Colson Montgomery, because you're hoping that those two catch on fire at some point and give you a little bit more confidence they could start on opening day next year. And Brooks Baldwin, man, he's earned his playing time. So Sosa's going to go to Charlotte and do what? DH? What do you think?
First base. He's been playing some first.
Okay.
Like they've been giving him reps there. Speaking of like positions where you don't really have to do a whole lot aside from retreat to first base on a grounder. That's one possibility. You could see some rotation. Also could be a case where, if they do have like a Paul DeYoung trade lined up, that all of a sudden like he's back, after 10 days, which could be the case. Like it could be where they just send him down because they're, especially if Moncada's coming right back after the break, where there's just nowhere to play him and there's no point in having him around on the roster, because it's not like you're going to put him in as a bat first guy, and you're not going to put him as a defense first guy or a pinch runner because he doesn't really have the speed for that. So there really isn't a purpose for him if he's not playing every day. So perhaps he comes back pretty quickly and there's just a DeYoung trade lined up, between now and July 30th. That makes it all possible and makes a lot more sense. But yeah, I think his defense makes it hard. I think it's especially with Moncada there. And the problem with his defense too is like it makes it hard for your young pitchers you're trying to develop. When you have defense that ragged up the middle, even on the corners when it's not great, or if you have a case of like Moncada being superior to Sosa at third to where you can really upgrade the left side of the infield. And then if you want your young pitchers like, Cannon and Thorpe, having the best possible support as the league gets used to them, getting the outs that a major league defense should provide a pitcher at the major league level, then, it makes sense to play Moncada and it makes sense for Sosa to earn his way up somehow. But, it's as somebody who's been, who's seen the upside in Sosa and wants to see him, run with an opportunity. He just has a number of blunders in the field that, especially like in subsequent consecutive days where you're just thinking like, oh, come on, get it together. Just a series without like a noticeable mistake, a rookie mistake that would make it a lot easier to put up with that. But on a side note, I was looking at the 2016 first round. Somehow Senzel has the second most at bats of any first round pick. And all that's gotten him is the worst wins above replacement mark for anybody who's made it to the majors. He's not the worst first rounder because like 5 guys didn't get there, and other guys like Blake Rutherford got like a cup of coffee and that's it. So Blake Rutherford only got a chance to be 0.2 wins below replacements. But in terms of like everyday players, like he's definitely somebody's taking the ball and running with it the wrong direction. I think Senzel has been doing that because of injuries and what else. But I think I mentioned it when we had our National Series preview that I thought Senzel should have been a White Sox at some point, and I guess I'm getting my wish.
You sure are. One thing I'm going to be paying attention to, can Lenyn Sosa chase down Jordan Dinks and all of his records with the Charlotte Knights?
Just to get to Jason Bourgeois levels.
Or Zach Remillard. Zach Remillard just might be like holding him back.
What would the term be for like the existent Lenyn supporters? Would it be, would you go with Leninites as possibly as a label?
Let me think about that.
Not as many people have died, but that's about it.
Who's the rapper Love Sosa is the name
Chief
of the song? Chief Keef. Maybe you could do a play on that.
That's Tommy Pham's walkout song. I wonder if it's or not Love Sosa, but in a different Chief Keef song. There's probably no connection. I withdraw.
If he changed it to Love Sosa, then he'll be protesting the
then it'll be protesting. Yes. This is what we'll watch for.
Well, speaking of Tommy Pham, we're going to take a quick word from our sponsors, but coming after the break, we'll preview the upcoming series against the Kansas City Royals. Is this going to be a hug watch type of weekend for the White Sox? The White Sox also wrapped up the Major League Baseball draft with some very interesting thoughts coming from White Sox Director of Amateur Scouting, Mike Shirley, regarding the NCAA's name, image, likeness pay and how it's impacting his job. And we hear from former White Sox pitcher Scott Carroll as he shares his favorite Kansas City spots next on the Sox Machine podcast. This episode is brought to you by Game Time, an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and views from your seats, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. We at Sox Machine are heading out for our annual road trip, this time to Kansas City. If you decide at the last minute to join us, awesome. If you need tickets, use Game Time to sit by us in Section 108 for the best deals. Also use Game Time for other sporting events like the Chicago Sky, which those tickets are hard to come by these days. And football season is just around the corner with Chicago Bears preseason games now available on the app. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use our promo code SOXMACHINE for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use our promo code SOXMACHINE for $20 off. Game Time. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences, so the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire right now and support our show by saying that you heard about Indeed on this podcast. That's Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
Welcome back to the Sox Machine podcast. The Chicago White Sox wrapped up their 2024 Major League Baseball draft this week, starting with first-rounder Hagen Smith, left-handed pitcher out of Arkansas. Over the next couple of weeks, we'll start tracking signing bonuses and when the new draftees join the White Sox minor league affiliates, including one of my favorite college players this past season, Austin Peay's Lyle Miller Green. He's got a fascinating story. He was born in Siberia, adopted by American parents, bounced around to 5 different schools in 5 years, including both high school and college. Finally repeated this year at Austin Peay and hit 30 home runs and drove in more than 90 RBIs. And his weighted runs created plus of 206 was 3rd in the nation, only behind Charlie Condon and Travis Bazzana. But Miller Green turns 24 years old in September, hence why he was taken in the 17th round. Nonetheless, Director of Amateur Scouting for the Chicago White Sox, Mike Shirley, shared why the White Sox are taking a chance on Miller Green.
It's an 81% contact, and he hits the ball over 105 31% of the time. It is a substantial data piece that's real. He's really good at heaters over 93. So as you dive deeper into the metrics, you start to realize, and the power is as good as anybody's in the draft. So the reason it was listed as a two-way player is because if you look through the pitch metrics, Brian Bannister likes some of the things he does off the mound too. So there is like taking a low-cost opportunity for us to tap into possibly 2 sectors of the operation is something that we thought was super interesting. So good stuff. And his story is great. You know how much adversity this kid has faced if you understand the story. He was adopted born in Siberia, maybe born and adopted, so he's done nothing but answer the bell on challenges in his life relentlessly and keeps performing. That's called makeup. Makeup wins a day. This kid wants to prove people wrong. So we're excited.
What caught my attention the most was a topic I wasn't expecting Mike Shirley to bring up: the name, image, likeness money and the mass amount we are seeing passed around in college athletics. Shirley was asked about how the NIL is impacting his job.
No, I think we were able to accomplish what we did. I think I was a little surprised. Man, this name, like, and imaging process has really changed the landscape of the value of these players. And it's crazy how sometimes I get frustrated because I feel like college baseball is setting the marketplace more so than Major League Baseball is setting the marketplace. And that's a little frustrating for me on this side. The amount of revenue that's in that side of the business is calling the ball. I was just in negotiations in the draft on a player, and I finally had to ask the advisor, like, what's he getting to go back to school there? So I'm always shocked by the dollar figures that's being shared into that world that's kind of like bumping into our draft a little bit. And I think it's something we have to pay attention to be frank. We should be the ones calling the ball. This is Major League Baseball. We should be the one leading the charge here, and we have to be careful to make sure that we're setting the tones we need. We need college baseball. It's a great product they have going right now, but we have to be careful that they're not getting in the way of a Major League Baseball draft and us acquiring the players.
I mean, I guess some of it happened in real time, but when you talk about the changing landscape with NIL and the transfer portal, do you see that, affecting future approaches or future drafts, or does it change, the undrafted free agent market a little bit? How does it, guide your process?
I think it's tricky. I think the NCAA has to really think about what they're doing. I think that it's turning into something. I was in a conversation with a player today trying to get him to step in professional baseball, and they have reference points of sometimes financial security because they're being given money like to go to school. That's real money, and so there's some security for them. And I worry that the end game should be to be a major league player. And I think sometimes people don't understand how you have to get into the system. You have to get into the system and get your career moving. You have to figure out how to be a professional. And they just think they can keep going back to school because the money's there. That's not always accurate. And your runway and your career can be, you need to make sure you secure it when you can. So it's a little frustrating for me, from that perspective. The guys are kind of going about their business like that.
James, Shirley was asked if he accomplished everything he wanted from this past draft and immediately went into how much he doesn't like the NIL in college sports. And you followed up with him about how it impacts his job, as we just heard in the audio package. So Shirley didn't really answer the question. So I'm assuming no, Shirley did not hit on all the targets he wanted to in this draft class because of money reasons. Is it that simple to explain to White Sox fans that are casual observers of the draft of what the White Sox were trying to accomplish this year?
I mean, Shirley has been pretty adamant that they were trying to get bid on people that were taken above them. Like Shirley has not done like the Hagen Smith was number 1 on our board all along act like whatsoever, as much as he's talked him up and talked about his potential, which has been refreshing. But he's made a lot of references to prep players asking for $2 million or other kind of overslot bonuses. And he's made references to college players that they wanted to get weighing NIL offers to go back to school. I mean, I think they drafted a couple seniors who probably were in similar boats last year who might have gone back and felt like they gave themselves at least the same level of chance that they would have last year. So I think he spoke like a man who probably missed out on a lot of things that he thought he was trying to land at some point. And while I don't see any like real significant issues with this current class, I think Bonemer's pretty much said that he was going to sign, and Larson sounded similar when he spoke about it, and subsequent checks haven't suggested anything otherwise. But the fact that like this was enough of a harrowing experience that he was like, let's take an insurance pick in the 20th round, I think at least spoke to kind of what the experience was, even if I really don't think like there's anything's going to fall through and prompt them to actually throw pool money at that 20th round or a Bailey. But I think that it seemed like there was a lot of highs and lows over the last 3 days. And I think even like, not that Caglione obviously went behind them, and they heard plenty of stuff about teams behind them bidding for Hagen Smith and them having to win that out, even as is, to get him at 5. It sounds like it was not one target and everything was set. It seems like there was a lot of haggling all throughout the 3 days.
Yeah, and that's what makes the MLB draft so much different than the NFL and NBA. You don't have this problem in the NFL. I draft you. You sign for whatever that slot recommendation is. The Chicago Bears, as we record this today, signed the number 1 overall pick, Caleb Williams, to his rookie contract. Baseball players, especially with the NIL, they got more leverage. And we saw this, Jim, later in the top 10. You may not know him, but Colby Shelton was somebody that I was kind of targeting for the White Sox, maybe around the 5th round, as someone that they can add another college bat. I think he's a shortstop, probably going to move over to third base, but there's some pop in his bat, even though there's some strikeout issues. He's going back to Florida for his senior year. And when I hear Shirley complain about the NIL, and you are in the Vanderbilt backyard, Jim, and the Vanderbilt Commodores are going to have to spend some serious NIL money to still be on top of the SEC when it comes to baseball. I do wonder in future drafts if this is going to be a problem for Mike Shirley. Be like, hey, we want to take this junior in the 6th round. I want to pay you $100,000. Sorry, Mike, don't draft me. I'm going back to Tim Corbin in Vanderbilt because Tim's got me $200,000. And I can see where that really impacts Shirley and impacts the way that we're going to have to cover the MLB draft. Like, the money all of a sudden becomes a much larger issue than it already was.
Well, to me, it seems like there might be one simple solution, maybe too simple, but theoretically, couldn't Major League Baseball just increase the draft pools?
Yeah.
I mean, like, going from like,
Heaven, no.
Yeah, it's like 15 million for the White Sox had 14 million to spend or something like that. Like, why not 20 million? Where is that?
Yeah.
6 million reasons why not 20 million.
But I mean, but in terms of, given the size of Major League operations and how much money the league has, like, why couldn't they just, they're the ones in charge of the cap. It's not like the government is setting the cap for what major league teams can spend on amateur talent. So if schools are paying players more or players are getting paid more to stay in school, then why the market should dictate that professional teams have to pay a little bit more to get those players.
Now, that's a good point, Jim. And maybe that is the counter move for Major League Baseball, because in his comments, Mike Shirley wants Major League Baseball to do something about this. There's no jurisdiction for Major League Baseball with the NCAA.
Yeah.
Like, that's a separate entity. They're not going to step on their toes.
That's the one thing, like, it sounded kind of silly, but if he's saying like, hey, this is not going to be tenable. It was barely tenable this year. It's not going to be tenable a year from now. Like, maybe he's not somebody who feels like he can complain about Major League Baseball in public, but if they're making these, if he's griping about it publicly, maybe the behind the scenes stuff is, hey, can we get more money to spend on these players, because this is just going to get worse.
Yeah, we're gonna have to, right? Especially if you're aiming for SEC guys. Like, so there's some White Sox fans in the Sox Machine comments wondering, like, why do the White Sox spend their second round picks on Caleb Bonham and Blake Larson? And I think just because of buying out college commitments, especially if you're drafting high schoolers that are committed to the SEC schools or the ACC or Big 12, any of the Power 4 conference schools, we'll even add in the Big 10 now with the schools that they have added, USC and UCLA, you're going to have to buy out their NIL money. And as a freshman, if they got some type of deal that over the next 3 years, along with their college scholarship, they're getting $100,000, $200,000+ a season, you have to buy out not only that, but also if I go to college and I become a first round pick 3 years later, Jim, because again, use this hypothetical, I'm going to Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt knows how to produce major league talent. I got to take that into my consideration as well as an 18-year-old working with my advisors. Like, what is that dollar amount to buy me out of my college commitment? And that price is only going to go up. And college juniors, thanks to the wild west of the transfer portal, which is a huge headache for college baseball, that they become pretty much free agents every single year. Whoever's offering me the most NIL money is where I'm going to be playing baseball next year. Yeah, I can see where this gets really crazy for Mike Shirley and all the creative things they were able to do in the past, especially after the 5th round. Good luck. You're going to have to be incredibly creative, or they're going to be continuing to pile up on all these college seniors that they're signing for $10,000.
When you look at what a player can earn in just, even if it's like not, maybe life-changing money or not money you can live on as a freshman or a sophomore in college, compared to getting paid like $30,000 to be playing in the complex in 115-degree heat and rooming with 3 guys, like probably a lot better just to have a college experience. Mm-hmm. As long as you have like any kind of academic acumen, like there might be some guys who just don't want to bother being, in college and having to worry about being academically qualified. And so they might be happy to take the money, but there might be others that are just like, when you weigh it out, not only besides the bonus, but also just the annual salary. Like, I'll make up the bonus in the end, but also make more money in the interim. And I don't have to spend 2 years just making the bare minimum and, playing half seasons in 115-degree heat. So that's kind of, how I see the math. And, when I say that, why can't they add $6 million to the draft pools? Like, that makes sense. But if you think of like Major League Baseball spending as little money as possible, the flip side is, what if Major League Baseball comes back and says the draft is 10 rounds now? And, you can get more money per draft, and we'll just, in 10 years, or like not 10 years, but I think it'll be 2030, after the 2030 season is when the player development licenses come up. Maybe they shave a level off minor league baseball, and just, this is kind of how it happens, is just a paring down of talent and minor league affiliates. So that's, I'm all for more players getting paid to play baseball, and, the best athletes being put into professional systems as quickly as possible. But I'm guessing Major League Baseball right now would be like, we'll figure it out. Or people will show up even if, they don't know how players get to teams. Like, we can just draft 10 guys and then sign a bunch of guys from the Frontier League, and who will know the difference? And that would be the very skeptical, cynical view, and that tends to win out.
I'll go more cynical. Major League Baseball is intentionally tilting the crop of players who enter pro ball towards people who hate school out loud, who then go on to be less effective MLB PA members, and thus they crush the union in a long-term play. Keep your third eye open out there.
Yeah. I love that conspiracy idea, James. Love it. The long game for Rob Manfred, even though he's retiring. Manfred did have his State of the Union press conference in the All-Star break. He was asked about if he's in favor of trading draft picks, and he is, and we'll see if that's including the next CBA. But Major League Baseball would love to have an international draft. Again, the money thing is a serious issue. And if you have questions about why do the White Sox select the guys that they did, again, it's not just best player available, but it very much in baseball with the MLB draft, it's the best player you can sign. And it sounds like from Mike Shirley, that was his sticking point in this last Major League Baseball draft for the Chicago White Sox. But I'm still excited for Hagen Smith. I still think that was a great pick by the White Sox in the first round. And I'm really excited to see what Brian Bannister and the pitching development staff of the White Sox do with Hagen Smith. But now we'll see what they do in 2025. The winter meetings, the next draft lottery, the White Sox cannot draft higher than 10th. They can't draft any lower than 18th. So they'll be in between that range. And their draft pool will not be as much as it was this year. So we'll see where Mike Shirley sits and what the strategy is next year. Well, baseball is back on the field this weekend. And again, we'll be in Kansas City to watch these games. Can't wait to see everybody as the Chicago White Sox and Royals kick off the post-All-Star break with a 3-game series. The Kansas City Royals are 52-45. They're having a great season, but they're 7 games back at Cleveland in the American League Central, and they're 2 games back of the wild card. They're in that delicate spot. What do we do before the trade deadline? Should we push more chips in and see if we can make it into the postseason? The Royals are very good at home. They're 31-18 this year, and they have won 6 of 7 games already against the Chicago White Sox. In their last 10, they're 5-5, and they entered the All-Star break a little bit on a cold streak. They lost their last 2 games. For the Chicago White Sox, the pitching probables for this weekend, Chris Flexen will get the ball on Friday. Jonathan Cannon will get the ball on Saturday. Jude Thorpe will get the ball on Sunday. Eric Fetty and Garrett Crochet will start the Monday and Tuesday games against the Texas Rangers after the weekend. With the Major League Baseball draft over and signing bonus negotiations beginning, Chris Getz now has more time on his hands to make roster moves. We've already seen him make some moves. So James, starting with this weekend, are we now officially on a hug watch? Are we going to start seeing more player transactions from the Chicago White Sox?
I mean, Tommy Pham had a broken tooth for a day, and everybody flooded my mentions with conspiracy theories about it. So I think we're already on hug watch if we had any reason to up to this point. I wouldn't think this is the big flood of moves. I would think, things will happen in the last 3 to 5 days before the deadline at a higher concentration than we'd see at any point before, and certainly this weekend. But especially with the White Sox being open sellers and pretty much talking to people, I want to say since opening day, but surely not long after. You can certainly see some of the smaller things kind of coming together sooner. The Jose Quintana trade famously was the day after All-Star break. I don't know, famously. I remember personally that the Jose Quintana trade was the day after the All-Star game. So it's possible. I'd probably just think 50-50 shot we see something this weekend, maybe less, maybe 30-70. It's just we're beginning the time where we should be on guard with it. Not that we weren't on guard already. I'd be surprised if Garrett Crochet got traded this weekend.
Does Tommy Pham take hugs?
Bro hugs, some dap ups. Yeah, not some tender squeezing, but I could see him doing the normal pass to the dugout.
I could just see him saying, Tommy, you've been traded to Philadelphia. He's cool. And he just walks out.
The way he walked out of his post game and everything. Walking. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, sure.
Yep.
Certainly to some of us, he will.
I have no obligations.
Jim, we're also speculating the White Sox could be possibly having Yohan Makata rejoin the team this weekend. Is there anything that you'll be paying attention to, at least on the field? I know we got a lot going off the field this weekend, but when watching these games, what are you going to be paying attention to in the first weekend post All-Star break?
Yeah, I think Moncada's been, on the Eloy Jimenez plan in terms of like playing most of the games in the ACL, and that seemed to be good enough for Jimenez, even though you can argue that it has been, but just the White Sox seem to say like, fine, come back. And so I'm not sure if that's going to be the program for Moncada, but if it is, then he's probably done enough to, show that he's healthy to, reappear in Chicago, especially like, if there are some possibilities of him getting traded, I would consider it like very unlikely unless they're going to throw in a ton of money. But if they are trying to showcase him a little bit, probably be better to do it sooner rather than later, just to plant the idea as they talk. But that's one. The thing I guess I'm curious about, like, kind of starts with the second half, because until we see some real youth movement stuff taking shape that is beyond Drew Thorpe and Jonathan Cannon. Now that Maldonado's gone, now that Tim Anderson has been DFA'd, now that Jose Abreu has been DFA'd, like Andrew Benintendi's kind of on an island here in terms of like it's him and Jack Sawinski, being, neck and neck as the worst player in baseball. Everybody below them is either like a backup or has been relegated to backup duty or optioned or DFA'd. And I'm guessing Benintendi's going to get like most of the playing time. Maybe he'll be platooned more just because of the Achilles thing. But I think he's playing well enough, and the competition is so barren behind him that he's just going to keep getting at bats. So like he could really compile something ghastly when it comes to wins above replacement or wins below replacement if he gets licensed to continue to play the way he's been playing, because I think every other team that has had somebody as bad as him has moved on. But, given that he still has 3 years left on his deal after this year, and he's still theoretically young enough, not like Abreu's in his late 30s. So like, Abreu can kind of just say, yeah, it didn't work. But Benintendi, given he's 30, like he's, still theoretically some baseball left. So, is 3 wins below replacement within reach, given all the elements here? Like, this is how it would start.
In 226 games with the White Sox over the last 2 seasons, Andrew Benintendi is worth negative 1.8 WAR on Fangraphs.
People said Yasmani Grandal is the worst free agent signing of all time, and I was thinking like, nope. He gave you 2 good years. Like, that's more than a lot of free agents do. And I think the Benintendi, they were just like, see how much worse it can get. And yeah.
And yet no tribute video.
They did not. I mean, Grandal was a 3.6 WAR player in 2021 for the White Sox. Add in his 2021 season at 1.6. I mean, 5.2 WAR. His 2022 season, 2023 season combined minus half a WAR, half win. Again, Andrew Benintendi's at negative 1.8. Hey, he hit a home run in his last game. He also made that ill attempt defensively.
Hey, watching that route was like watching somebody try to draw a diagonal with Etch-a-Sketch.
It's impossible, though.
There was a point on Sunday where both he and Robert had gotten on base in their first 3 plate appearances each, and Eloy had double play with the bases loaded, struck out, and double play with the bases loaded behind them.
So James is saying Andrew Benintendi's not even the biggest worry, Jim. It's Eloy.
I mean,
how far can Eloy sink?
They take turns.
There's a menagerie to pick through and focus on.
I haven't even looked at Eloy season stats because it just makes me really depressed. And it's not a time to be depressed because so many of you listening to this, oh, good God. So many of you listening to this are going to be hopping on flights in Midway and O'Hare and joining us in Kansas City. A reminder, we'll be there Friday night. It's a 7:10 p.m. Central Time start. We'll be sitting in Section 108, which is by the left field foul pole, not the right field foul pole. Be there also on Saturday. Saturday is where we have all the events. We have the Negro League Museum, so if you have already purchased tickets on SoxMachine.com, you have received an email from Jim Margalus about those details. That tour starts at 10:30 in the morning on Saturday. Our pregame party at the International Tap House in Crossroads District starts at 2 o'clock and will go into 4:30. or whenever the bus leaves. And for those that did purchase bus tickets and the bus transportation, the bus will leave the bar at 4:45 and get to Kauffman Stadium around 5:15. And we will be leaving the stadium either A, as soon as everybody gets back on the bus, or within 30 minutes of the game ending on Saturday night. We're very excited. These are always fun weekends to see everyone. And to learn more about Kansas City, Jim Margalus sits down with former White Sox pitcher Scott Carroll.
Last August, Scott Carroll, who pitched for the White Sox from 2014 to 2016, joined the Sox Machine podcast because I happened to see him appear on an episode of House Hunter set in his native Kansas City. We had a great conversation about being a 29-year-old rookie, his experience in the White Sox organization during the proverbial interesting times, and I had to ask him some HGTV questions as well. I'd recommend listening to it if you missed it, because most of the conversation is evergreen in nature, although we did talk about Kenny Williams and Rick Hahn, and they were fired shortly after. With the Sox Machine from the 108 road trip taking us to Kansas City this weekend, I figured it would be a good opportunity to bring him back on to talk about Scott Carroll's Kansas City, especially since there's another element of his White Sox career that's come back into play. Scott, thanks for coming back to the Sox Machine podcast. This makes you a returning champion. How are you? How does that make you feel?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me back on, Jim.
Before I ask you about Kansas City, I want to talk to you about your experience with the Birmingham Barons, because they clinched their first postseason appearance since 2013 when they won the Southern League title, and you were on that team. When you go to Regions Field, there's a big banner with the team celebration photo, and you are front and center, or like back and center on it. You're center on it. And I'm curious if you still recall that experience and what that was like for you as a player.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a really cool time, and we had a lot of good players on that team. Actually, that clearly as we won, but guys that went on to have major league success and are still having success. So it's cool to remember that time. And Birmingham is a great city. When enjoyed playing baseball down there, and had some cool relationships and some really good coaches that helped us along the way.
Was that when your elbow gave out around that time?
No, so that was the year I was rehabbing. So I actually got to be a part of that team as I was rehabbing. So my elbow surgery was in 2012, and then 2013 was when I was rehabbing and playing with the Barons and pitching with them. So yeah, it was kind of an interesting time for me personally as my career, because I was rehabbing from Tommy John and trying to get back to what I wanted to be and be 100%, but also getting to be a part of a playoff championship team run. So that was cool.
Yeah, I was curious about that as a player, because organizations, they get to trumpet minor league titles as a way to say our players know how to play winning baseball. And minor league teams, they get some prestige to say, come watch the Southern League champions. But I'm curious what it means for the players as are players watching the standings. Like, how much does it matter? Because you hear a lot about how wins and losses don't necessarily matter at the minor league level. It's more about player developments. But when you actually do have a chance to win, what does that feel like, or how much does it really register?
No, that's a really good question, because I think during the season, you're honestly not even really paying attention to it, and because you're focused just on obviously your personal goals and development, and that's overall what the organization's trying to do. But as you get closer to the season and you see that there's a possibility of playing some more baseball and having a run at something, then it's definitely the competitive juice to start flowing some more, and you want to try and play as long as you can and beat that next team. So it's something to where it doesn't really get paid attention to during the season, but then as you get closer and the collective group of guys that are playing, it starts to make sense towards the end of the year.
Now, when it comes to the real reason we have you on here, we're having our first ever road trip from the 108 in Kansas City, pre-gaming at the International Tap House Crossroads location, and then going to Kauffman Stadium for Saturday night's game. A lot of White Sox fans will be making the trip to Kansas City for the first time. And so if I can start with the general question, what do White Sox fans need to know about Kansas City, especially in July?
Okay. Well, first off, it'll probably be just as hot. It'll be hot and humid. The second thing is you gotta fill yourself up and get some really good barbecue. Depending on what type of experience you want, there's some really good choices. So if you want to, Oklahoma Joe's, you got Gates, you have Q39, and then you have Jack Stack. Those are the kind of the top four in Kansas City, but definitely need to get filled up on that. And also, it's just they're coming to Kansas City now. there's a lot of good energy around this baseball club, and the city is supporting it pretty well, and they're playing good baseball. So you're coming into a time when you're going to see some competitive baseball.
Can you pick a favorite barbecue place? Do you have a favorite?
Yeah, that's a good question. So that's what I was going to say. Probably my favorite would probably be Joe's Kansas City, Casey Joe's. But then after that, it would be neck and neck with Jack Stack and then Gates, because it just depends on the experience you want. So that's why I said you have to physically go to these restaurants so you can tell the difference, because they all do certain things really, really well, and it kind of just depends on what you're kind of craving and what type of experience you want when you're sitting down.
Yeah, my favorite is Arthur Bryant's, because that was the first one I went to. I went to the Negro Leagues Museum first and asked at the front desk saying, where's a good place to eat around here? And there's really only one place to eat around there. And they kind of laughed and said, you need to go there. And so that was my first experience. And it was, it was mind blowing. So it's hard to, I judge everything against that first experience. So they win, but I think, I've had the experience of others, because I've gone back numerous times. My wife has family in Kansas City. And so I think I've surveyed all of them. And I would swap out Gates for Bryant's in the top 4.
Okay. You're more of a vinegar based guy, huh?
Not too vinegary, because Carolina doesn't necessarily appeal to me. And that's like super vinegar, I think. So.
Yeah. No, that's cool. Well, yeah, and you bring up kind of the Negro League Museum, just as far as being in Kansas City. That's something I would recommend. So any Chicagoans that haven't been here before, just try and pop by and see that, because it's a really, really awesome museum, and they're doing a heck of a job, upholding that and trying to keep that museum just strong. And what's even funnier, so 2013 team, Micah Johnson, he actually is an incredible artist right now. And he helped, and he was just in Kansas City a few weeks ago, and he helped develop, I think it was the Satchel Paige baseball card for the Negro League Museum.
Cool. Yeah. He made some rounds in Chicago advertising or touting around the Rickwood Classic. Just the work that he had done, and it was really impressive. Yeah.
And so the 2013 guy from that team, and former Chicago White Sox. So it's really cool how that's all blended together.
Yeah, we're actually going to do a group tour of the Negro Leagues Museum Saturday morning. So I think there are about 40 of us going to be descending on the museum. So should be a great time. When it comes to other attractions in Kansas City, and there's the Nelson Atkins Museum, there's the World War I Museum. Are there ones that are like sound, maybe like a tourist trap or kind of cliche, but are still totally worth it, even though they come up like number 1 or number 2? Where do you point people?
Well, I mean, and also, I don't know if you guys have like amusement parks near you. I'm trying to remember, but like there's this place called Worlds of Fun, Oceans of Fun. If you have half a day to spend, it's actually a pretty cool amusement park to get some thrills and ride some really cool roller coasters and enjoy something like that with just some buddies or even the family. That's something that's fun to do. But as far as cliche, I think which is actually, it still holds up. But if you want to go to Union Station, it's this really cool spot where they've held Kansas City Chiefs Super Bowl parades and things. But yet the Union Station is a great spot to check out and see the history there. But also just there's some shops inside there, and you can walk around and see some really cool stuff.
I think that's where the Crossroads location, I think, is close to there.
You're not far away.
So I think that will be convenient. When it comes to Kauffman Stadium, was that your home stadium growing up, in terms of the place where most of your major league experience were at?
Yep, absolutely. I mean, my friends would try and sneak into ball games there, but also just go out and sit in the outfield bullpen seats, and that's where a lot of our memories started, where we would go to see some Major League Baseball. So I never as a youngster got to travel to different ballparks and see Major League teams from when I was a youngster until I was older and actually playing in the big leagues. So
what's it like playing there? And then have you gone back there as a fan or, with the family?
Absolutely.
I've gone back. What's it like playing there and then going back and watching the game, where you played as a fan or as a viewer?
Yeah. So I actually had the luxury of playing there as a high schooler, and which was really cool. So we played in this thing called the Frank White Classic. So my high school and another rival high school from the Kansas City area played there, and it was a really, really cool experience to be a high schooler and step onto a big league field. And then obviously years later, when I was in the big leagues, to pitch there, it's just what I remember a lot is the just the sounds of the fountains is so cool, just out in the outfield, and it's a bigger ballpark too. So as far as it's fairly pitcher friendly, and hitters don't always fare well as far as home runs traditionally there. So it can be more favorable to pitchers. It's a really cool ballpark, and they've done some cool updates over the years just to make the concourse you can walk around the whole thing. So there really is a lot of good seats at that stadium, and the walkability inside the stadium has gotten a lot better. I think just the crown, when you look out in the outfield and see the kind of that big crown jumbotron is a really cool touch. So yeah, it's still a very, very pretty ballpark, and I was lucky to play there.
Yeah, I was curious about your view as a local about the tug of war going on, trying to get a new stadium, trying to move it, because I've been to Kauffman a number of times. I went to school at Missouri. So I first went there in college, and I saw some of the updates. And even though, like, I guess the one thing that aged is that it's in a parking lot and there's nothing around it,
Yeah.
whereas most of the ballparks now are around neighborhoods. But everything else, like in terms of sight lines, food, as you mentioned, being able to walk around the whole thing now, it's a pretty democratic experience in terms of like not too many exclusive club levels. You can sit wherever you want or kind of sneak down later in games. You don't get
Right.
harassed by people with club level tickets, which is kind of what I look for in a ballpark. Like everything else about it besides the parking lots have aged pretty well. So I'm curious, like, if you're following the attempts to move or have new locations, or now Kansas is getting into the act and trying to see if they can pry the Royals away. Like, what's your attitude towards a possible relocation?
Yeah, well, first off, I mean, yeah, you bring up some good points, but like we have to remember like what Arrowhead, so the Chiefs and the Kauffman, what the Royals, what they got started when the Kauffman family and the Royals Truman Sports Complex, when that got started back in the 70s, it was ahead of its time by having the ballparks right next to each other. And so they chose this area, and it's worked really well so far. But like your point, having it out in just a parking lot is kind of odd, but it was ahead of its time to do that back in the 70s. But overall, I have been following kind of the Kansas and Missouri tug of war as far as where that stadium's going to go. I think the Kansas side has a lot of leverage as far as being able to offer the star bonds to the Chiefs. And I don't think so much that the Royals would benefit by going over there. I think ultimately the owner, John Sherman, the majority owner, wants this ballpark downtown. And if I had to guess and put my money on something, I would still think they find a way to get it downtown. And then the Chiefs would end up moving over to the Kansas side and being out near the Legends area. So I think that would just work out, and they'd still be able to have Kansas City as the local team, but it's just across state lines.
I think when it comes to football, there's a ability being once a week to make it a destination that you go to separately, whereas baseball is more a matter of convenience when you have 81 games. So that does make sense.
Exactly right. Yeah, exactly right. I think that, and that'll help the overall Jackson County. That'll help the downtown area, because where you guys are staying, Crossroads, that's kind of the area they had anticipated picking when they first put it on the ballot. But they're still going to work through that and see if they can come up with the best site and location. But I think downtown baseball has just proven, and that's what Sherman was trying to say, is that it's proven that it's the best experience for the city and for overall for the baseball as a product.
Oh, and then one other thing I meant to ask you about, I'll be flying in, and I haven't flown into Kansas City in a while. The airport's way better now, right?
Yeah, brand new as of last year. You have a little bit of a longer walk from your plane to out until they get into your ride, but it's a brand new airport, and it's really, really nice, and they've done a great job with it. So
yeah, the previous Kansas City airport, for people who hadn't experienced it, was like was not prepared for the 9/11 security measures, because they had these really small,
3 separate terminals.
Yeah, 3 separate terminals, and then the gate areas were all behind like individual security checkpoints. So if you got past security, you couldn't go anywhere. So you're kind of penned into these very small rooms with like a kiosk for food. So you either had to eat outside and then try to rush in when everybody else was, or just sit with nothing to do. So I'm looking forward to seeing it, because that's it was always kind of the dread of like having to drive 30 minutes north to go to the airport and then have nothing to do once you get there. So
right, but you gotta admit, it was so convenient being able to walk right out of the terminal and be right there next to your car. Like your family could just wait for you right by the terminal, and like boom, you're there and ready to go. I know the food and the experience of sitting and waiting wasn't that good, but just getting in and out of the airport was very convenient.
Yeah, it was more convenient departing than arriving. Or sorry, arriving than departing. Like, if you had somebody picking you up there, like, yeah, it took 5 minutes. If you had somebody dropping you off 2 hours early, because that's when they could give you a ride, that's when it was a little bit rougher. So I can see both ways. Yeah. Okay, so one more question. Let's say a White Sox fan visits Kansas City and falls in love with it, drops everything, and wants to move there. Who can help them buy a house?
Wow, great question. And that's me. That's me. So I'm licensed in both Kansas and Missouri, and would love to help, and even just talk to people if they have any interest or know anybody that's looking to do something in this area. So I appreciate that. That was nice.
You're welcome. I thought it was pretty smooth. Thanks again for your time. And this is the official invite to crash our party on Saturday.
Yeah, thank you. So where are you guys going to be sitting again, and where can I, just meet up or just kind of get in touch with you guys once you guys get to the stadium?
We will be, we'll be pre-gaming at International Tap House Crossroads, and then I believe our seats are in section 108. 108?
Okay.
Yep. Because
nice.
The other group we organize with, they are in 108 in Guaranteed Rate Field, which is right behind the right field foul pole. So their classic view is obscured by the foul pole.
Yeah.
So if we can get 108s, if it's affordable, then we tend to do that.
Well, as you said, it's a group about 40 or 50 people?
For the tour, I think it's going to be a little bit larger for the game.
Gotcha. Okay. Nice. Well, cool, man. Well, yeah, I'm excited for you guys, and I'm excited for the Chicagoans that haven't been to Kansas City yet, but also just to enjoy their weekend, and it's gonna be a fun time.
Sounds great. Thanks a lot, and hope to see you there.
All right, thanks, man.
That will do it for this episode of the Sox Machine podcast. Again, thank you to Scott Carroll for joining Jim Margalus to do that segment with us and give us the best tips and places to go in Kansas City. Again, we cannot wait to see everyone this weekend in Kansas City for our annual road trip. If you just discovered the Sox Machine podcast, you can subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts, such as Spotify and Apple Music. We also upload our podcast episodes into our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Sox Machine. You can follow us on social media. We're on all the platforms at Sox Machine. Follow James this weekend as he'll be covering the White Sox Royals games at Kauffman Stadium. He's at JR Fegan. You can follow me at SoxMachine_Josh. If you want to unlock all access to our White Sox coverage, including more detailed coverage about the recent MLB draftees, sign up at patreon.com/Sox Machine, where not only do you get an ad-free version of both the website and the podcast, but again, you get all access to our White Sox coverage. We also have additional tiers of support where we host monthly Zoom calls, and you can even gain direct access to us via a group chat, being part of our Veterans Committee. You can sign up at patreon.com/Sox Machine. Monthly plans start at $5, and you can save with an annual subscription. The Sox Machine podcast is a production of SoxMachine.com, your home for all things Chicago White Sox baseball and part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Alongside James Fegan and Jim Margalus, I'm Josh Nelson. Thanks for listening and watching.